And with that, we will go ahead and get started. So, as I said, my name is Hannah Henza. I'm the Director of National Programs at Hazon, the Jewish Lab for Sustainability. I'm a longtime Greensboro resident, and I've spent the majority of my life exploring links between the natural world and religion. For the last 8 years, I've focused much of that energy on the intersection of agriculture and Jewish tradition. And this afternoon, I represent a small piece of the Jewish community that professionally tends these connections, asking the questions: how can ancient Jewish wisdom inform the ways that we interact with and build the world around us? Collectively, there are thousands of Jews around the world engaged in what we call Jewish outdoor food farming and environmental education, or Jaffe, trying to understand how we balance the sacredness of faith and tradition with the convenience of everyday life. Hazon and Isabella Friedman Jewish Retreat Center have been thinking about these concepts for many years, raising goats on Adamah Farm, hosting shechting demonstrations, and finding ways to use every element of those animals, including their skins, for nourishment or ritual purpose has been a project of pride and exploration of Jewish peoplehood. But those projects that we've been exploring have been one off and largely for educational purposes. While there is power in that work, it is perhaps more powerful to explore a disruption of the status quo by commercializing these honorable and traditional practices. Jewish tradition offers us countless lessons in sustainability and dozens of commandments to care for one another and the creatures that walk this earth, but we so rarely listen. Today, we ask what would happen if we leaned into 2,000 years of wisdom from the Jewish people and changed the way that we engage with our Jewish identity? What does it mean to slow down and watch the world unfold through the rhythms of biblical life? We might not all be able to separate from the demands and pressures of modern life, but what if we allowed our rituals, our traditions, and our sacred practices to be carried by the wisdom of ancient agrarian life? Jewish life revolves around an agrarian calendar. Almost every holiday marks a significant moment in an annual agrarian cycle, and yet we have never been more disconnected from our land based heritage. The Or Hadash program offers answers to these questions and so much more. This project revives the sacredness of Jewish life while leaning into the needs of a modern world. So it's with that in mind that I hand it over to Adam to introduce himself and the artistic nature of this project, as well as the Greensboro Contemporary Jewish Museum.
Thank you, Hannah. It's so nice to be here. And hey, all. My name is Adam Carlin. I'm a social engaged artist, educator. I currently work at University of North Carolina, Greensboro, as a director of our off-campus contemporary arts center, and I'm director of community engagement for the College of Visual and Performing Arts. I essentially wear a lot of hats. I change Zoom backgrounds a lot, as you can imagine. But the hat I wear tonight is as co-curator of the Greensboro Contemporary Jewish Museum, along with Shoshana. It's a project Shoshana launched as part of her residency with the Jewish Studies program at University of North Carolina, Greensboro in December 2020. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit about the museum to get you all familiar with it. So the Jewish Museum is a decentralized and experimental institution that was created in context to questions we asked ourselves about contemporary Jewish museums and about the dynamics of Greensboro itself. So some of the questions we asked were, what can serve as an emerging model of a contemporary Jewish museum in the United States today? How can small Jewish communities throughout the southern United States claim the same cultural agency to create a Jewish museum as part of their metropolis counterparts in San Francisco, New York, or Los Angeles? What would that representation look like through material and other cultural productions? And what could this museum offer to the discourse on contemporary Jewish life? So for the first exhibition of the Jewish Museum, we collected objects from the Greensboro community that they felt related to their Jewish identity, as you could see behind me here, things like Tupperware containers, or stamp collections, family Torahs, pillows, as you could see, and more. So for that moment, the Greensboro Jewish Museum, it existed in the gallery. And when all these objects went back into the homes of the owners, it existed in the homes of our constituents in Greensboro. So as a decentralized museum, it exists where it needs to. And tonight it's on Zoom as part of the Big Bold Jewish Climate Fest. So why did the Jewish Museum want to be part of this program here and help produce a nice program? So museums are spaces for people to come together for dialogue, for challenging and reflecting on the culture that came before, exists now and is coming in the future. And the Or Hadash project, it's exactly that. It's a reflection on the past, it's a reconciling of a present, and it's a fight for the future. And so the Greensboro Jewish Museum, as I see it, it's a perfect venue to have this kind of exploration as part of Or Hadash. And finally, I wanted to mention one of the focuses of the Jewish Museum, and something that's being explored by many other arts institutions, is socially engaged art, or otherwise known as social practice, which is a contemporary art genre where the artworks are the engagement itself rather than the objects. So the conversations, the meals, the moments of generosity, all of these things are the artwork. So I want us for a second to really think about this whole project as an artwork in itself. So instead of it being an object, the artwork is Shoshana, Jacqueline, Jesse, it's your investigations, it's their inquiries, it's the dialogue we're gonna have, and even the questions you're gonna ask. Those all make up the artwork that is Or Hadash. So next we're gonna introduce our incredible panelists. I'll start with Shoshana. So Shoshana Gugenheim Kedem is an interdisciplinary artist, Torah scribe, curator, and chutzpanit. She is the founding artist and curator of the Greensboro Contemporary Jewish Museum in Greensboro, and various other projects that dismantle normative power structures and redistribute agency to the public. Shoshana was one of the first women in modern times to train and practice as a Torah scribe. Today, her work as a scribe manifests through a project, Or Hadash, an art intervention into the parchment making industry. Jesse Meyer, excited to have Jesse here, is the CEO of Pergamena, a family business established in Eisenberg, Germany in 1550. Jesse, alongside his brother Stephen and a growing number of employees, oversees and participates in the production of both quality veg tan leather and parchment for dozens of niche industries. And then Jacqueline Smith is the founder and CEO of the Central Grazing Company, a regenerative food and fiber lamb company located in Kansas. Jacqueline has been a successful entrepreneur and an animal welfare advocate since 2000. Today, she operates Central Grazing Company and is a pioneer in restoring healthy soils, strengthening regional supply chains, and creating new regenerative food and fiber economies in the Midwest. Welcome all.
Is that me? Am I up?
You're up.
All right. Okay. Unmuted. All right. Thank you. I just want to say it's so exciting and wonderful to have everyone here. And I was just really fascinated listening to Adam and Hannah speaking. I could just listen to you guys. It was so great contextualizing all of this for everyone. So I'm gonna, each of us are gonna share a little bit about our work. And I'm gonna just start by showing sort of giving a little insight into what this project is and how we are working this collaboration and some of the meaning behind this. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and let's see. Okay, everyone can see this? Great. So it's always hard to know where to start and how to start this. I wanted to start today just by putting some questions out there, things that I've been asking myself that actually intersect with the Greensboro Contemporary Jewish Museum as well. And so some of those questions are, what makes an object sacred? Okay. What is the moment that an object transitions from mundane to sacred? What's the meaning that happens there? What is the human's agency and responsibility in that moment? And are the appropriate intentions and invocations stated enough to deem an object sacred? So I just want to put these questions out there to hold as an umbrella as I share some of these, some of the work that we're doing and some of the work that's led up to this moment for me. So as Adam mentioned, I am a Torah scribe. I started scribing, it's been a long time now. I don't know, something like almost 20 years ago. And it is, and I'm going to go very quickly through this because this is just to help contextualize this work. I think a lot about this work, not just from the fact that it's breaking a glass ceiling, but also really looking at it from a gendered perspective. I'm really curious about how we do this gender performance, especially when you like literally look at images of how many people still today think about the scribe and what the scribe can look like and does look like in contemporary times. The other important, so that's a really important piece about my work, is sort of breaking these gender barriers. A lot of that is centered very much in the Jewish community. And so this is an image of what at least 5 women scribes in the world look like today. It's a very different picture than what I was showing you before. And the other piece that's really important in my work, and this plays into the social practice, and this is also a place where I am a bit of an outsider in the way that I think about and enter my work as a scribe, is that the collectivity piece is very, very important to me. And so bringing communities together, whether that's communities of scribes being brought together to do the writing, or communities that haven't had access to the physical object of the Torah coming together and participating in certain ways, the collective is always very important, and collaboration as I think about my work. So that is all by way of context. So the other, so something that's very important to me also, and you'll see as we talk more, is this idea of collective consciousness and materiality. And so in this quote, every human-made thing is a material manifestation of the collective consciousness of its time and place, channeled through the individuals who commissioned and made it. I believe that this manifests itself in the people who are actually doing the writing, and also the people who are engaged in all of the work and making sacred objects, and also in this case, particularly in the animals whose lives are part of this. So in considering all of these things, and through a whole, I don't know, I can't say coincidence, but like some divine inspiration to get to know behind the scenes of parchment making, I became very, very interested when we were living in Israel. I'd been living in Israel for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, and was scribing, and became very, very interested in where the parchment is coming from and how it was made, and happened to live just a few minutes drive away from the factory that was owned and operated by the singular family that was selling parchment to women in a don't tell, don't ask kind of situation in Jerusalem. So it's important to understand that, and I'm condensing like an hour and 15-minute sort of presentation into 10 minutes to just sort of gloss, I wanted to like touch on a few things. It's important to understand that parchment can be made from the skin of sheep, deer, cow, and goat, and that is mostly where it has existed. And this became, as I was studying, this was known to me, but really started to become very important, because in the current industry of parchment making, it is tied very closely to the industry of raising animals. And I mean the industry that really is surfacing and in a very uncomfortable and often very cruel manner in large agro animal industry. And so what I discovered is that the parchment for 99% of the parchment, and that's being generous, 99% of the parchment that's made for scribes, for Hebrew scribes and for our sacred text, comes from embryos of cows. So it's all calf embryos. They're not killed for the parchment. I mean, they're not killed for the calf. It's byproduct of the industry. About 2% of the animals that go to slaughter every day and from the dairy retired dairy cows, they're pregnant, and those calves are saved and are then used, those skins are used for making parchment. The general reason for that is that they are very supple, which is true. And the other sort of reasons that have been put out there have to do with sort of justifications, I would say, and these are in conversations that I've had with people in the industry of parchment making, is that these calves, because they haven't lived in the world, haven't suffered, and they have a very high elevated spiritual existence. And I don't accept that. I just don't accept it, but it's important to understand that that is partially where the use comes from. So this just to show you, I do think that not only are the animals sort of, not only are we really exploiting the animals, but I think a lot of times the people who are in this system are also being exploited. And I want to just flag that. These are just some images just to show you on the ground sort of how the process works. These parchment makers in Israel have contracts with industry, agro industry in the United States, New Zealand, and Argentina. And they keep those calves, they skin them, they freeze them. When they have like 500 skins, they send them over and they are processed. And this is inside the facility. And the top left picture here shows you just a tiny slice of the amount that we're talking about. This is an old turkey coop, and it's like, I don't know, it's enormous, 50 feet long, probably much longer. I'm not good with those kinds of measurements, but this is like floor to ceiling piles and piles and piles and piles of skins. And then these are the skins as they, or the finished parchment in the store. And this is where we go to buy our parchment. So one of the things that, so the question really for me has been, how does the Jewish community reconcile this inhumane treatment of the animals, literally, upon whose backs we're writing our most sacred Jewish texts, and how do we reconcile that, calling this sacred and understanding the way in which these animals' skins have arrived to our places of worship and to our most sacred moments. And so, so I was asking this question a lot to myself, and then started making connections with other folks in Israel. And this was, we moved to the States in 2016. This was happening in like 2015, and I had gone back and worked with a photographer to photograph these. So anyway, this is a friend of mine, Jonathan, who is a shochet, a ritual slaughterer, and he was providing us with backyard meat. And so I asked him, could he provide me with skins? And so we started working together, and he was doing the slaughter for me, providing the skins, and I was bringing the skins to my parchment makers. And and it was a very very, very, very small scale, like almost one-off process. We could do like I could get a few skins at a time and take them to my parchment makers. They would make the parchment. And then this particular parchment, which is from sheep, it was sheep and goat, was I had a Megillah written by scribe Julie Seltzer, friend and colleague. And that was great. And then we moved to the States, and there were two things that were really on my mind. One was carbon footprint of like, were we going to still keep working with people in Israel and then have, animals that were being sent over to Israel, killed in the States, sent to Israel, made into parchment, sent back? How are we going to do that? And then the other piece was really about who was I collaborating with? Because really at the end of the day, the people that I was collaborating with were just doing me a favor. It was like, oh, this is nice. Oh, Shoshana, you know, they'd known me for a long time. They were doing me a favor. You know, Jonathan really did feel very passionately about this idea, but I was in a world that wasn't mine. I was still this outsider pushing into someone else's world, and there was no investment really in what I was doing. And that was really, really hard for me. And also I realized that this idea of excess was really generating the way that these parchment makers, who I have such a beautiful, appreciative relationship with, they were operating in excess. So it didn't matter if I gave them skins and I bought skins from them that they had finished. It didn't matter if they weren't perfect or weren't finished the way I needed them, because there was so much more. There was always more. If it didn't work, it doesn't matter. There's always more skins. But I wanted and needed to work in a system where everybody was committed to the work that we were doing and trying to get it to the best, so that each piece really counted, because each animal's life is important and means something. So one of the things I started doing just to try to tell this story is working with a graphic narrative artist, Matt Tonti, and we've been working on a whole narrative that tells this story. But the important thing that happened is there are people out there, as Hannah mentioned, who are making parchment. Rabbi Linda Motzkin, who is a friend and colleague, is making it for her own community, for a scroll she's writing. And at Adamah, people are engaged. The goats who are slaughtered, the skins are being used to make parchment. And this is a mezuzah scroll that was written. And those things are really, really important. But what I want to do is think about it on a large scale, how we can shift this system. And so that was when I met Jesse. And we have been for almost a year now exchanging back and forth, and what was meant to be an in-person visit has turned into this really beautiful exchange through the mail. Different parchment trials, different kinds of skins, different finishes, and Jesse will speak more about that. And then Jesse introduced me to Jacqueline, and Jacqueline, you'll hear from Jacqueline about her work, and the conversations that have unfolded in that place are so affirming, because of the work that they do, but also because of their real interest and commitment and passion about how we can really make this happen. Yeah. So I want to turn this over to, and I just want to turn this over to Jesse, and we'll hear from Jesse and Jacqueline, and then we'll sort of open this up for conversation. Thanks.
Am I next?
Yes.
Am I supposed to be next? Okay. Thank you, Shoshana. Thank you, Big Bold Jewish Climate Festival. And thank you, Jacqueline, for letting me join this conversation. All right, and let me see if I can pull up my presentation. 1 second. Okay, and Rachel, do you have yours ready? If I get started, I can tell you next slide and you can take it from there. Is that correct? Sorry, 1 second. Okay, good. You've got it. All right, thank you. All right, so I'll just get started. So yes, as Shoshana was saying, her background, her approaching us, and our involvement, Parchment and Vellum, how Pergamena, our company, demonstrates the intersection of the skilled craft, artistry, tradition, and the future of sustainable agriculture. I work at and currently own Pergamena Parchments and Leathers. We're based in Montgomery, New York. It's about an hour and a half north of New York City in the Hudson Valley area. And we've been here since 1981. Prior to that, we were in North Bergen, New Jersey, across from Manhattan for about 150 years. Prior to that, we were in Philadelphia for 20 or 40 years. And then prior to that, as Adam mentioned, we were in Eisenberg, Germany. So, and in that area since 1550. So we have been working with animal hides for a very long time. Ironically, I see no mention in our records and old account books of us making parchment. It's always been leather. So here I am trying to sort of move the business into the next generation and into the future by going back to an even more traditional material than leather, and that would be parchment. But I got my start in college. I got a BFA in sculpture, and at some point was casting about looking for sculpture materials, and had come across a few artists that used parchment or animal skin more generally as a sculptural material. So I started experimenting with it, and since we had lots of it lying around our family tannery, and have been sort of refining it ever since, coming across folks who have said, there's a long-standing need for this material. You should find out more about it. So I've done that. I've done lots of research, a lot of trial and error, and seeing as there are, only a handful of tanneries in the country, and even less parchment makers, I've pretty much had to teach myself. So it's an old craft, a medieval craft, partly due to that fact. There isn't really much research and scholarship in this area. So, I mean, there are some old recipes out there written in Latin. My Latin isn't so great. So that means that, plus they're very vague anyway. So that means I've had to rediscover the process myself. But to show you, this is what a piece of parchment looks like. This is our facility. That's a piece of calf skin that's stretched and dried and ready to be used for parchment, for writing on. In this case, that's a calf. This is what our facility looks like. This is a view of the wet work portion of our facility, we call it. It's a tannery, but so we do this. Does double duty, parchment and leather. But this is where all of the wet work is done. The skins come in, dried, salted, frozen, fresh, and then we have to remove all the hair and the flesh and so on. And this all happens down in this portion of the facility. There is a lot of machinery that most people haven't seen before and that are specific to the tanning industry. So we have those that are available, at our disposal. This is what a skin looks like when it comes in. This is what the raw material looks like: dirty, salted, dried, and with the hair and the flesh intact. Kind of gruesome looking. Certainly doesn't look much like parchment or something someone could use for anything. But that's part of what I appreciate about this. The artistry portion is, in personal satisfaction of seeing this material go from such a repulsive looking end or beginning product to something that's very beautiful at the end. So that transformation is something I really appreciate. So, and here are, we are a commercial facility here, so we handle large amounts of material. So this is pallets worth of hides, stacked, salted, ready to throw into our tanning drums, where they're mixed with water and other chemicals to do the processing. So we try to process 200 or 300 hides at a time in our facility. That's the most efficient way to do it. The first thing that needs to be done once the skins are re-soaked is to wash them in caustic chemicals to facilitate the hair removal. Historically, calcium hydroxide, also commonly known as garden lime. I just also realized I should be telling you to forward to the next slide. So I apologize if you're not keeping up, but we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're 6 slides in. I'll try to remember to say next slide from now on, forgive me. So the 6th slide, skins are washed in caustic chemicals to facilitate the hair removal. And historically, calcium hydroxide, also known as garden lime, has been used and is still used to this day. Next slide. The skins are dehaired and then flipped over and fleshed. The flesh is taken off using the machine, which does a nice job of removing the flesh consistently, uniformly. And then when you're done and the skins are washed and degreased, then you end up with something that looks a bit like a wet t-shirt. But at this point, the skins are ready to stretch. So next slide. And here are two examples of hides, a sheepskin traceable to its source farm. And that's the one on the left, and the one on the right is a calf skin for comparison purposes. And this is where working with Jacqueline at Central Grazing comes in. So we look to work with her to supply hides for this venture, and then hopefully be able to get a satisfactory end product to Shoshana. So the one on the left is a sheepskin, and we can trace that all the way back to the farm. So next slide. Oops, I went backwards, excuse me. All right, yeah. So this is a picture of me stretching a skin in one of these frames, stretching the skins while it's wet. As Shoshana showed in her picture, we do it similarly. Next slide. This is me using what's called a moon knife or a lunellum. And this is used to shave and remove the flesh and to thin down the skin surface in preparation for making the surface suitable for writing on. And that tool, it's called a moon knife because it does have sort of a crescent shape, but it's been around so long that the name actually, it has a name in Latin, and that would be lunellum. So, but it's a very old tool, but it does the job very well. This tool is one that I made, but the design of this tool is a very old design. So next slide. This is a close-up of a shaved skin and the edges of the skin. As the skin dries in the frame, it dries under tension. That helps to keep the skin flat. And then the grain and the flesh side, in other words, the inside of the animal and the outside, have to be shaved and thinned down and made suitable for writing. Next slide. These skins, no two of them look the same. They can look rather beautiful, and that is another one of the things I appreciate about it. I mean, you know, it's a sort of, my artistic side responds to that. So, you know, it can look very beautiful. It can also be challenging in that no two skins are the same. So if you're looking for consistency, that can make it difficult, but, you know, it's part of the game. So this is a piece of deer skin here, this close up. Next slide. This is goat skin. And if you can see, if you look a little closer, you can see some of the hair follicles and the hair roots that give the grain pattern, it's called, its appearance. And this is one of the things people appreciate about parchment is it has that subtle beauty, which you know, has been used for many things. Next slide. So, but where it comes into play in the calligraphy and manuscript portion is trying to come up with a surface that is suitable for writing. And if you're a scribe and you're going to spend a year writing a Torah, the surface quality is everything. So this is a close-up of calf skin on the left, and then me trying to replicate that surface quality on the right on another skin. Takes a lot of effort to get just the right quality, and there's many factors that go into that. You know, the type of animal, the breed, the age, how it's prepared, the sex of the animal. So many different features and characteristics. So next slide. So as far as the sustainability aspect of it, this is where, you know, this is where we sort of overlap with that field. And this picture here, this handbag, is an example of a bag made with leather that can be traced back to the farm that the cow originated on. And in this case, it's a farm in Georgia that's fairly well known called White Oak Pastures. And they've been held up as a nationwide model for sustainable agriculture. They've been trying to pioneer that for a while. They, also have been trying to institute zero waste. And we have been working with them for a few years now. And, they produce a lot of food materials, but they're looking to extend that sustainability to the byproducts they produce. And in this case, that would be the hides from the material, which they've been sending to us. We've been turning into leather and then sending it back to them to create finished goods out of. So in working with Central Grazing and Shoshana, this is what we're hoping to make viable in our Parchment as well. Next slide. So just to sort of wrap up, we've been around for quite a while. We hope to stay around for a bit longer. This is one of our relatives, ancestors. This is a large painting that hangs in my parents' front hall. And this is Meyer, and this portrait is from 1686. And then here is our current generation. That's myself on the left, my brother Stephen on the right, and my father Carl in the middle. So next slide, on to slide 18. And so in closing, following the movement of wanting to know where your foods and your textiles come from, the concept of sustainability, it's sort of in the zeitgeist and the field of agriculture, and it's extended to its byproducts, such as animal hides. So big players are taking interest, and this is an Instagram post I saw just this morning with comments from no less than Elon Musk, talking about how to come up with a carbon sequestration technology. So the effects of this work are going to be far-reaching and will take a long time to be felt, but they're in motion, and we're hoping, they will definitely have an effect on us. But we're hoping to work together with folks like Shoshana and Jacqueline at Central Grazing to be pioneers in this field. And last slide. Again, big players. This is another example, the Timberland Shoe Company, which I'm sure everyone knows, working with the Savory Institute, which is a certifying organization. And they're helping to build a framework, and we hope to take advantage of that framework to build a sustainable business model, and with leather and with parchment. So there you go. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse.
Yep.
So I guess it's my turn to kind of talk about Central Grazing Company and why we're here at having this conversation with you guys. And I have just a short video that shows a little bit of our food side of our business, but I want to talk more after the video about why my passion and why Central Grazing Company even exists. So I'm going to first play this this one video.
Growing up in the Midwest, I saw firsthand how changes to our food system changed our communities. When farmers started growing monoculture crops, what we used to grow right in our backyard started being shipped in from other countries. And as we watched this shift in our food system become industrialized, we saw opportunities for small farms dry up. When I started raising sheep in Kansas, it was a way to create a more just food system and bring new opportunities to the Midwest. At first, it just felt natural to me to try to raise my flock using nature's inherent ability to nourish itself. Then I started to see really amazing things happening. I saw once quiet and dry pastures blooming with life in an abundance of emerging ecosystems. This type of farming, now the foundation of everything we do at Central Grazing Company, protects all life, from the field mouse to the winged predator, and it recognizes that each thing in the ecosystem is just as necessary and important as the other. Central Grazing Company works every day to build traceable local and regional supply chains. We only partner with small independent farmers that pay close attention to their soil and raise their flocks using the highest animal welfare standards. This type of farming heals. It heals our community, it heals our health, it heals our earth. It gives us all a better way of life. When you support Central Grazing Company, you are supporting small farms and businesses who in turn are supporting nature's strength and resilience. Join us.
Okay, that just gives you kind of like a overview, a little bit of what Central Grazing Company is. And when I started to think about preparing for this discussion, I thought, I was looking for the best way to prepare it. And I thought about putting some slides together, and I realized that the root of this conversation I've been having with Shoshana is in the storytelling of this this work that we're doing together. And I decided that the best way for me to approach it is to give you the story of why Central Grazing Company exists. It's something that I don't normally talk about because I'm very passionate about it, and you probably will be able to hear that as I'm talking about it. So I started Central Grazing Company in 2015 as a direct response to the way that the region where I grew up. I am from the Midwest. I was born and raised here, as were my parents and my parents' parents, all the way back to my great-great-grandparents who came to the Midwest in a covered wagon. And we have been here in the same area the entire time. And it was very common for opportunities to exist for people in the Midwest to stay here until my generation. My generation is the great exodus from the Midwest. And as we're watching this great exodus happen, we're seeing these vibrant, rural, and sufficient, and completely sustainable communities collapse on itself because of the lack of opportunity. As farmland becomes a monoculture of a sea of corn and soybeans, we are watching the opportunities leave because diversified farms no longer exist like they did. The infrastructure for producing food and fiber no longer exists in the Midwest, and there's no recovery at this time unless innovation and progression and really revolution happens here. And so I wanted to look at the tools that exist in our capitalist society and figure out what could we do to help provide more opportunities for the Midwest. And so I started a small company called Central Grazing Company that aggregates land from diversified farmers and also large no-till farmers in the middle of the heart of the most rural communities as a way for them to bring another niche market into the industry. I watched growing up farms dry up and become large corporate farmers that are farmed by corporations that don't even have a stake in the community. The people who farm the land do not live in the community any longer. And I watched as they put animals in warehouses and trucked them food, and I knew that I needed to do something about that. So my heart has always been with the animals, the animal welfare aspects of it. And as I started to research, what does it mean to have good animal welfare and also eat the flesh of animals that give us nutrition and wear their flesh as comfort? What does that mean to us to do that? And I realized that part of that solution is making sure that, one, the animals can behave naturally on the land as they are designed by the Creator to do, and also build a regenerative economy that supports community stakeholders to make it a thriving opportunity for the next generations to come. It is working in harmony of nature instead of against nature. And I knew that part of that goal was to utilize 100% of the animal. And that was back in, I think, 2017 when I started researching what is leather, what is the leather industry? And I quickly learned, I knew zero about the leather industry. And I quickly learned how the global leather industry is, you think the food industry is bad, you should look at the global leather industry. This is it's phenomenally terrible. And I, through my research, I met Jesse and we started to figure out a supply chain. What does it mean to take the lamb hides from going into the landfill because there's no market to actually curing them, transporting them to one of the only veg tanneries in the United States, and then bring them to a manufacturer to make them into handbags and then to sell them? And can consumers understand that clothing is actually an agricultural product? You have a choice to either wear something that comes from fossil fuels, or you have a choice to wear something that comes from the soil. And when I'm thinking about this project, when I was approached by this project by Shoshana, I was really very deeply honored to be part of this discussion, because I was having a level of conversation with her that I hadn't had with anyone else before, about the spiritual connection to these creatures that provide us comfort and nourishment. And I realized that this is the story of the Midwest. Like, this Torah that is these beautiful hides are going to be made into will always carry the story of the Midwest. And that story of the Midwest is of grasslands, and the grasslands and the ecosystems that exist here, and the people who used to steward those grasslands, and the genocide that has happened, and the blood that was spilled on the soil, and the settlers who came in and started disking up the grasslands into almost extinction, and where they opened up the soil, and the soil wept into the rivers and finally into the oceans. And there is a story of heartache and exodus from a place that built community. And as long that sorrow that exists here, this Torah project also brings a level of hope, because there is this revolution happening with companies like mine who are really building this new infrastructure and really trying to take the power back from a system that is now designed to make us fail. And we're fighting at this level to bring in these opportunities to keep growing what we need most here, and that is to people to stay and to have opportunities. So I come to this from a very passionate perspective of this is a grassroots campaign, literally. And we are working on a social level with storytelling and artists and farming and community and involvement and collaboration. And that is the path forward out of this crisis that we're in. And I'm so honored to be part of this discussion. So that is all I have to say about that for the moment.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much, Shoshana, Jesse, Jacqueline, for sharing all of this wisdom with us and the behind the scenes look at your process. Adam and I are going to ask a couple questions now, and then there's some great questions coming in on the Q&A. So as a quick reminder for those watching, if you have questions for the panelists that you'd like to ask, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. That's the best way for us to keep track of those and get them to the right place. So my first question actually is for you, Shoshana, and Jesse and Jacqueline, if you want to chime in as well. But thinking about this as a complex, interconnected work that taps into truly ancient practices, I'm curious, what are the Jewish ethics or values that motivate you in this work, and how do you think that these Jewish values influence your work throughout the process?
Thanks. I don't want to give a really long answer. I mean, if you're asking specifically about naming sort of different areas of Jewish ethics, I mean, generally, it's just an inherent thing. I can't even name. I mean, I know we have ideas about tashchit, and we have all these ideas about. It's really my early training, like actually my return to and I don't even like necessarily to use the word of a active Jewish practice, I would say, really happened through like a deep dive into many texts that have to do with Judaism and ecology, and that happened in Jerusalem in the early 90s for a year, studying 3 hours a week for a year with my with 2 teachers there. And that really sort of brought me back in, like, and there are so many early understandings about what it means to be Jewish and our relationship to land and an earth-based Judaism. And so those have been just inherently woven into how I think about being Jewish and the ways that it's important to me and what that looks like in our family life and choices around food. And the one place I can say is around kashrut. Like, for so long, you know, kashrut, ideas of kosher food, and particularly around ideas of meat, have existed almost solely until movements recently in how we kill the animals, what kind of animal and how the animal is killed. But little thought has been given to how the animals live, not just how they die. And so that that really deeply informs this. It's informed how I make my food choices. And now it is deeply informing how I think about this work.
So when hearing all of you speak, there's this sort of contradiction that I keep coming back to, which is maybe more of an opportunity than a contradiction, but you know, novelty and invention are really curious things when thinking about something as ancient, unmoving, and sacred as a Torah. And I think the same could be said about tanning leather for 450 years, or stewarding the land of the Midwest since the covered wagons, as Jacqueline was saying. But still, I think the three of you are resolute in trying something new. And I think artists do similar things. I think a lot about the word avant-garde, which translates to in advance of the guards, the part of the army that goes forward ahead of the rest. So I was hoping you could speak to the relationship you have with the past and the future, holding on to your tradition while at the same time going forward, you know, above the rest. And that question is for anybody who wants to answer it.
I'll start. I'll just say that, you know, doing this for 450 years, I mean, it's no small miracle to be operating for that long. It certainly wasn't my intention to keep doing this, but at some point I really started to gain an appreciation for it. Yeah, it's difficult to keep this going. It's challenging, and trying to discover the artistry in it has definitely helped make this more relatable for me and make this something that you know, I can appreciate. I mean, I did not plan on doing this when I was younger. You know, when you get when they do those aptitude tests and everyone checks forest ranger, that's only because parchment maker is not one of the choices in that test. So yeah, I kind of, you know, made this myself. I appreciate the fact that I've been able to sort of carve this out, and I've definitely learned a lot doing it. And you know, I appreciate being able to keep this going forward, you know, into the future. I hope it can last another generation or two.
And I just kind of will echo some of that, the ancient wisdom of farming too. I mean, like we've moved into multiple different types of. We moved from an agrarian culture into an industrial culture in farming, and this revolution that's happening is moving back into the agrarian. But we're taking the things we learned about modern business and modern farming and applying it to the ancient wisdoms of how prairies work and grasslands work in order to have this equal exchange between the farmer and the grasslands. Like, we don't have to work against nature. We can work in harmony with nature. And that's what this revolution for farming is about.
Interesting. So it's a sort of innovation and also a return to the roots. Another question I had was, you know, can you speak about just collaborating with each other? How has changed your own disciplines? You know, encountering different disciplines, how it changed, you know, your approach to your own?
I can, there are many things to say, but one thing I really want to say about that is that, and Jacqueline has really, in the conversations that we've had, has really helped me to shift or maybe to add another layer of really important dialogue and perspective on this work, and that is the soil regeneration piece. And sort of really filling out the picture for me, because I'm also, I mean, listening to Jacqueline's story now, just about like not knowing anything about leather, like I am learning, like I know very little or knew very little about parchment when I went into this, but now I'm getting the picture keeps expanding. And so my collaboration with Jacqueline, you know, has really helped me to see the bigger picture, and also with Jesse really understanding more and more. And we just talked about this recently, like really understanding so deeply what it means to be making parchment and what goes into it and all of the processes. There's so much there's so many layers that keep getting pulled back and revealed.
And also, I'll just add that, I mean, I don't know if this is in Yiddish or if it's in Hebrew, but the term goy, I am not Jewish, and I have been making parchment since 1995, but I was never making it specifically for the Jewish market. Where I'm located, we're not far from New York City, and there is a very large Orthodox community nearby who we've had lots of interaction with over the years. So it's very interesting to see how they live, and you know, to get a peek inside what they use this parchment for and how big a part it plays in their, you know, their life. You know, each, what it is that they're making it for versus what I'm making it for are different end uses. So, and they have different processes, you know, very tightly prescribed according to, you know, Orthodox kosher laws. It has to be made a very certain way. I haven't necessarily made it in that particular manner. So in a sense, this is me going back and having to reinvent or reinvent the wheel, relearn the process, and trying to do it in this particular manner so that it is suitable for this product. So I appreciate Shoshana involving me in that so that I can sort of go back and finally nail down this particular method of production. And assuming it can be done this way, then, and that I am capable of doing it, then hopefully that opens up a bit more opportunities.
We're going to switch over to audience questions now for a few minutes. There's some that are more straightforward and some that are a little more complex, so it should be a nice discussion. I'm just going to go down the list, so for those who are kind of wondering what order I'm picking. First question is, are there any Jews of color working in this area, producing and scribing parchments for sacred texts? So I'm guessing, Shoshana, maybe you're the one to answer that, but yeah, just curious about diversity in the field.
Yeah, I mean, the diversity in the field exists primarily in gender and non-Orthodox. Like those are the places where I think inroads are being made into this. Like you probably noticed in the images that I shared, it's traditionally been, or at least the industry in Israel, which is primarily where it exists for the Jewish community, is an ultra-Orthodox, completely male community of makers.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a traditional practice. Next question is about demand. Wondering what is the current demand for parchment specifically for sacred texts in the United States? And they're wondering how this demand is being met by suppliers. Is there the possibility for interdenominational collaboration to source the types of parchment being described by what Jacqueline and Jesse, you're doing? It sounds like maybe we are reaching outside the Jewish community, but a little bit on if you could speak a little bit to the demand and supply specifically in this regenerative farming style.
Well, I'll say that working outside the Jewish community before this project, I can speak maybe a little bit to the different types of demand that there are out there for this material. It's been used for manuscripts for many, for centuries and longer, 1,000, 2,000 years. More recently, it's used, I mean, our biggest market is for interior designers and for furniture makers. So it is used as a luxury, a luxury surface material. So reaching outside this particular field, there is a definite use for it. But as far as the demand within the field, we have been approached by some folks recently, such as Shoshana, to try to help with this. Probably most of the demand and most of the supply, I would assume at this point, though, is being done in Israel. But maybe Shoshana, or you could speak to that more.
It sounded to me like the question was not necessarily around parchment for Hebrew scribes, but the parchment industry. Is that correct, Hannah?
Yeah, it mentions both parchment specifically for sacred texts, but also wondering about collaborations or expanding the sort of regenerative farming style work that's happening here. What's the demand for both of those?
Right. I mean, it's interesting to hear, how outside of a Jewish context for sacred texts, it's what that demand looks like. I mean, I can say that it's when I have an opportunity to sit down, with folks who have some peripheral interest in commissioning a Torah scroll or mezuzot or tefillin or some other sacred Jewish texts, the interest is there. What actually sometimes have had a harder time with, and this is not across the board, but the scribes in my community, who are pretty much all women, and that's all new, it's what it will mean for the pricing. And there's been concern about the pricing being pushed up. And so my work has been really mostly with one-on-one conversations with scribes to help them understand why it's important to rethink this and why they should be, I think they should. I would really like for them to be, when they're getting a commission, to say, here's an opportunity to create this Torah with another layer of meaning, and to really elevate it in this way. It will cost an extra $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, but here's why I think it's worth it and why I really want to recommend that you do that. That has been the hardest place for me, is to really get the community to say, like, we're totally invested. We're gonna do this. Yeah, because there is demand. I mean, you saw those piles of parchment of skins and that was just like one shot. I mean, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of skins that are sitting there, and they're being made into parchment because there is a demand. There's a worldwide demand. Almost all the parchment that is used, the family that I work with sends parchment out all over the world. So yes, there's a demand. There's just a deep level of education and shift that needs to happen. And this is the work that everybody in the Jewish environmental movement has been doing around everything: farming, food, the whole system.
And Jacqueline, do you want to speak to the demand you've noticed over the last few years around regenerative farming practices? Has that shifted, or not sure if there's anything you could say around that?
I mean, it definitely, the conversation about regenerative agriculture is strengthening for sure. People are understanding. I mean, COVID has really shined a new light on some of the real critical problems of our food system. And me working in the food system and having leather be a byproduct of it, it's very, it's a chaotic time for us still, even after a year of being in COVID. Nothing has settled down, and so we're really working hard to try to solve these problems. And the conversation about regenerative agriculture is definitely shifting more towards, like, what does it mean to be more environmentally friendly? And it's not so much just being more environmentally friendly, but a regenerative ecosystem literally takes into account that nothing is more important than the other thing. They all have to work in harmony with each other. And that includes everything from the region. So it's decentralizing processing, and it's really creating grassroots movements and in small town communities across the United States where infrastructure has been demolished, and making sure that the farmers that farm the land don't live in poverty. I mean, there's something really critically wrong with our system if you go into farming and it's just a guarantee that you're going to be in poverty the rest of your life. And so regenerative agriculture shifts that conversation a lot, and definitely I think people are becoming more aware of it. There's still this conversation about the price. You know, we're going through some capital raises to like help support my business, and one of the conversations that I have frequently, which is kind of always surprises me, is that I get conversations about who's my competitor? Who's my competitor? And my competitor is a global farming industry on all levels. That's my competitor, because and the policymakers, because they're the ones who push that price down. That makes it really unattainable in a consumer's mind about the real cost of our clothing and the real cost of our food system. So that's my competitor, not my neighbor down the road. That's my peer. We're working together to solve this issue.
That's incredible, the way you're framing the system, and this final question we're going to ask from the chat is, I think, reflective of that. And Jesse, maybe you and Jacqueline can both speak to this with the history of your families and working your respective arts. How is the process you're working towards similar to the history of creating Parchment? This person says, I assume the whole animal was used that my Sefer Torah from the year 1800 is from. But maybe could you say a little bit about, is this more of a hearkening back to a traditional holistic way of making sacred text, or is this really brand new and innovative?
I would think that, I mean, in the current environment, there is much more of an interest and emphasis being put on making sure, you know, about the sustainability of the process. One thing that I think is slightly ironic is that, you know, the skin is a byproduct in most cases of the farming and the agriculture and the raising of livestock. So in almost all cases, the animal is getting used for meat, and the hide is hopefully going to also get used. So when someone says that their Torah was made in 1800, I can almost guarantee that they ate, you know, that they didn't raise that animal just for the hide. They raised it more to provide sustenance for the family. So, but the funny thing is that in the current climate, you know, the global market for leather has gone through some tectonic shifts in the last few years. At present, the price for cowhides as a commodity is as low, almost as low as it's ever been. Whereas, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, it was the highest that they had ever been. It was $110 a piece for a cowhide. Now you can't give them away. People are landfilling hides because it costs more to preserve the hide and store it, salt it, and transport it, and then turn it into a product than it's worth. So I think that, you know, it's important. I mean, and this is, you know, what we're working together here to do, I think, is to take something that would otherwise be discarded as waste and trying to imbue it with some meaning and make it important and, you know, make it a value-added product that, you know, we can hopefully offer commercially.
And I lied. We're going to come full circle with one final question, and that'll bring us right up to 2:15 Eastern time, which is, I think, what we had marked as the end of this conversation. This question is for Shoshana and Adam specifically. As artists, although I understand that Jesse and Jacqueline, you may also have art backgrounds, can you point to other artistic projects that parallel or act as models for efforts similar to this? Or is this really an isolated art endeavor?
I'd also love to hear, Shoshana, coming off of that, you know, if you could talk about how this relates to your larger body of work or other socially engaged projects that you have done kind of leading up to this, or are working on now, that relate to this project.
Well, it's such a great question. You know, I mean, in terms of that first question, so much of my work is really, you know, me like being inspired by other artists and really standing on their shoulders. Like they've really held up so much. And I'm having a really hard time thinking, like, is there someone specifically? You know, in my work, I always go back to the work of Helene Ilon, Zichronah Livracha. May her memory be a blessing. She actually died from complications from COVID this year, and she has always been the primary artist who has really informed my practice on a whole. I mean, not only her upbringing, I was not brought up as an Orthodox Jew, but her upbringing as an Orthodox Jew, her feminist art, her that's deeply embedded in her Jewish life, her Earth Ambulance project has been something that's really I've carried with me for a long time. So I guess Helene, you know, as a singular artist, woman, Jewish, and you know, sort of deeply embedded in questions about Judaism and feminism, and ecology. And I think, and in terms of like how this work ties into my other work, you know, that whole that trajectory, on one hand, there is like this trajectory that emerged that I could have never imagined that this is where my work as a scribe would lead me to, ever. But I've just sort of been following the questions, and I think that that's really so much of how my work happens. There's a question that's just like burning, and I need to find out, and I need to understand it. So my work sort of in social practice, you know, has gone from, and specifically in the world of Torah as a physical object, has traveled from scribing to the creation of this Women of the Book project, which was, you know, women from all over the world recreating the Torah in a visual way, and then really coming back around to this physical, this materiality and the questions of materiality, and so you know, in that nice little container of 3 projects. And yeah, I mean, there's so much more I could say. I mean, just that notion of sacred object and objects, and how we name things as sacred, and that really surfaced in the first exhibit of the Greensboro Contemporary Jewish Museum. And if folks are interested, you can see more about that. So these questions of sacred and materiality, even though I work so much as a conceptual artist now and in social practice, objects really still are very central to my work in that way.
Thank you, Shoshana. So I think that brings us to the end of our panel here. I want to thank everyone for being involved: Hannah, Shoshana, Jacqueline, Jesse, Rachel, the tech support in the background, and everyone for joining us here today. We appreciate all of you. And thank you all so much for being here. We'll put in the chat some links to all of our different organizations and ventures, and please keep in touch.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. This is so great. Yeah, I'm available for more questions. If people have questions, I can hang out a little.
Likewise, I was trying to answer some questions, but you can only type so fast.
Yeah. I don't think there's a way for people to directly ask us, but if anyone wants to, I don't know. There's a lot of more questions in here, so.
Shoshana, there were a couple questions we didn't get to in the Q&A. I tried to pick one per person. So if you want to either type answers or answer those directly, feel free.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how many folks are still, well, I guess I see some folks on. Oh, there's so many great questions. I'll have to just write to people, or we can write to you guys.
I always have the problem, which is when you're done with the Zoom call, all the questions and comments in the chat go away, right? Is there any way to preserve those?
No, I think that we're going to be able to save all the questions, but I will do a quick copy paste just in case.
Thank you.
Yeah, please do.
All right, well, I'm going to sign off. Thank you, Adam, for putting the links in there. And thank you, Shoshana and Jacqueline and everyone else for inviting me. I guess enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse.
All right,
Thanks, Jesse.
appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
So beautiful. Thanks. I'll be in touch with you soon. Okay.
Bye.
Bye. And to you guys, thank